a June night in the year 1912, the Moore family went to sleep in their home in Villisca, Iowa. All 6 members of the family and 2 friends of the children had no idea they would never wake up. They had no idea someone was hiding in the house, waiting to murder them. Hello, I'm your anonymous host. Together, with our panel of experts, we will share with you 5 incredible, true horror stories that happened in real life. Let's begin. The 1912 Moore family axe murders.
Josiah and Sarah Moore, as well as their 4 children, were pretty well-known members in their church and town. The 4 children were all members of the Children's Day program at the Presbyterian Church, which Sarah, the mother, organized. Josiah, the father, was a pretty well-established businessman in the town. He owned the Moore Implement Company, which is basically a retailer that sells farm equipment, like John Deere tractors.
Mary Peckham was the neighbor of the Moore family. She knew the family very well. She thought they were great neighbors. Her house was very close to theirs. From her window, she could see their daily lives. She could see the kids playing when Josiah came home from work, and even when they'd get up to do their chores.
There's a really good chance that Mary Peckham saw them come home on the night of Sunday, June 9th, after the Children's Day program. I mean, their houses were right next to each other. They practically shared the yard.
Sarah Moore, the mother, ran and organized the church's day program for children. The church event lasted until 9:30 p.m. Mary Catherine, one of the daughters in the Moore family, invited her 2 friends to sleep over that night. The 2 friends were Ina and Lena Stillinger, 2 sisters. They walked home from the church to the Moore house.
By 10 p.m., the entire family was at home and getting ready for bed, including the 2 visiting Stillinger sisters. It's a lot of people in a small house.
But unbeknownst to them, there was a 9th person in the house. Someone who was not going to sleep.
Sometime after midnight, probably around 12:30 a.m., is when the entire Moore family was asleep, including the 2 visiting Stillinger sisters. At this point is when the intruder made their way into the house and into the master bedroom of Josiah and Sarah.
The killer started with the parents. As the couple lay asleep, the murderers began the sickening act. They started with Josiah. It's reported that he had more axe wounds than any of the other victims. There were also gouges in the ceiling above him from the murderer swinging the axe so vigorously. Sarah, who lay next to him, was next.
This is where the logic of the investigation has always been weird for me. How do you murder one person in the bed first without waking up the person sleeping right next to them? I feel that the murderer or murderers killed both of them at the same time or quickly went back and forth between 2 people. It just doesn't make sense that you can kill one person without the other waking up. So I think both of the parents were hit almost at the exact same time.
The killer then made their way to the bedrooms of the Moore children. Each was also killed in their sleep. A surprising feat, given there were 4 kids, and none of this commotion woke any of them up. All but one victim was attacked with the back of the axe, using the blunt side to cave in their heads.
The murderer only used the blade of the axe on one victim, Sarah, the mother, which according to the police report was the 2nd victim. So this is a morbid detail, but I tend to think that after killing the father, they used the blade of the axe on the mother and realized it was difficult to do because when hitting the person with the axe, the blade probably went all the way deep into the person and was hard to pull out to then rapidly swing and kill someone quickly. So I think after it proved difficult using the blade, they went back to using the blunt end of the axe.
After the killer murdered the children, they actually went back to the parents and delivered more blows to the dead bodies. Was this an emotional attack? Was the killer exercising some motive with the attack on the lifeless bodies? After attacking the parents a 2nd time, the killer made their way to the room of the 2 Stillinger sisters who were sleeping over. The last victim was Lena Stillinger. It is believed that she was awake at the time. She had wounds on her arms that were thought to have been from her trying to defend herself. She was also the only one in a sideways position on the bed.
There were a lot of suspects, and they were all pretty compelling cases as well. You could make pretty convincing arguments for each of the 7 people that they did the murder. But the Reverend, he just had a lot going on in his case. And he was a really creepy guy.
7 suspects, and all do sound pretty suspicious. But the Reverend is the one I'll focus on in this video because he sounds the most suspicious. Reverend Lynn George Kelly was a traveling preacher. He came to Villisca that Sunday to speak at the Children's Day program. He was an odd man that made many uncomfortable. He spoke fast and was a very excitable person. Some described him as bird-like. He actually reminds me of the Reverend Kane from the Poltergeist film, a film we actually made a whole video on. That film was notoriously said to have been a cursed production. Many deaths and tragedies were linked to that film. Watch our video to learn more. Reverend Kelly was a main suspect in the Moore family murders. He left town the morning after the murders and apparently told others on his train that there had been 8 people killed in Villisca. This was around 5 a.m. The bodies weren't discovered until after 7 a.m.
It was actually the neighbor, Mary Peckham, who initially noticed that something was wrong. She was up at 7 a.m. and she realized that the kids weren't out feeding the chickens and doing their chores. So she called Ross, Josiah's brother, and had him go inside and see what was going on with the family.
Ross was the one to enter the house and discover the unspeakable fate of his family. Reverend Kelly was the main suspect, but it wasn't an open and closed case. It was known that Kelly was a little off. He had suffered a mental breakdown earlier in his life and was often caught being creepy and inappropriate with women. For a few weeks after the murders, the Reverend was obsessed with the case. He was writing letters to the police. A private investigator wrote back to Kelly asking for any information he might have. Kelly wrote back saying he had heard the sounds of the murders and possibly saw the ones who did it. The police couldn't determine whether he was telling the truth or if he was imagining the things he saw. Given his mental illness, it seems he may have just been fascinated by the murders and was imagining things in his head.
There was actually a break in the case 2 years later when Reverend Kelly was arrested for sexually harassing a woman who was applying to be his secretary. He was mailing her obscene pictures. He was later sent to a mental hospital.
In 1917, 5 years later, the police got a confession out of the Reverend. But this was after many hours of being interrogated. It was possible that the police had no other leads, and he was as good as a suspect as they were going to get, so they pressured the confession out of him. Even after the confession, it wasn't enough, because 2 court trials later, Reverend Kelly recanted his confession and was not unanimously found guilty. The Reverend was set free. No one was ever found guilty of the murders. The house is now open for tours and spending the night, if you're brave enough. But the story doesn't stop there. In 2014, a 37-year-old paranormal investigator named Robert Stephen Lawrenson was spending the night in the haunted Moore house with some friends.
Robert was a paranormal investigator who went to the house with a group of friends who showed up to do the usual ghost hunt. This is something that the house gets a lot of. People will visit and do the usual scientific experiments trying to find something supernatural.
He was alone in one of the bedrooms when suddenly he cried out for help. His friends came running in and found him stabbed in the chest. The stabbing happened at 12:45 in the morning on June 10th, the same day and time that the murders happened 102 years earlier. The person who stabbed Robert was himself. He never said why he did it or what came over him, but for some reason he was compelled to inflict these wounds onto himself in the cursed house. He was flown to a hospital where he made a full recovery. He never spoke of the incident again. So, is the tragic case of the Moore family finally closed? Or will tragedy continue as long as the house stands? You be the judge. The demon inside their son. A young man named Kennedy Ife woke up in August of 2016 in his North London home, and he had no idea he would never set foot outside again. The day started bad for the young man. He told his family that he had a horrible pain in his throat. He was not acting like himself. He was beginning to scare his parents and his siblings.
The family said the pain he was experiencing was causing him to act insanely. He was screaming and throwing tantrums, then when they tried to calm him, this only made things worse.
In an attempt to calm his son down, Kennedy's father took hold of him. This set Kennedy off on a rampage. Kennedy bit his father, then threatened that he was going to cut off his own penis. The family was now very concerned for his well-being. This wasn't just some adolescent outburst. Besides, Kennedy was well past the point of such immature behavior, given he was nearly 30 years old. Kennedy, in one of his outbursts, screamed that there was a python snake inside of his body. The family thought this has to be the work of the devil, so instead of taking him to a mental health facility or a hospital, they decided to strap him to a bed and perform an exorcism.
You have to remember that this is 2016. What they're doing is what people did 100 years ago or before. I'm shocked by their thought process.
The family said they only tried to cure him of the demon inside of him. So as he was strapped to the bed, they surrounded him and began to pray. They did this for 3 days. After being denied the ability to use the bathroom, eat food, or drink water, Kennedy told his family that he urgently needed water. His dehydration was very obvious. He was now in critical condition. His life was genuinely in danger. His brother called an ambulance to come help his brother. When the medics arrived at the house, Kennedy was dead. He died from breathing issues and dehydration. The entire family was accused of murder. His brother told the police, quote, "It's clear that the thing was inside him. What we believed was a demon because it was not natural. It was clearly trying to kill him. We had to restrain him for himself. It was clear if we didn't restrain him, he could have tried to harm people in our family."
It wasn't the family's decision to call the police when they felt threatened and endangered by Kennedy. Instead, they decided to strap him to a bed and perform an exorcism. In 2016.
After the EMTs pronounced him dead, the police arrived. It was clear something nefarious had happened. In front of the police, the brother, Colin, went over to the dead body of his brother and began chanting and praying. It was an attempt to resurrect his brother and bring him back to life. Either panic was setting in and illogical actions were the result, or this family did not have a full grasp on reality and what they had done. Based on all the evidence, the entire family of 7 people were accused of manslaughter. They were also accused of false imprisonment. During the trial, it was revealed that Kennedy had over 60 wounds on his body, and some of them were bite marks. Their family members also had some wounds. The father, Kenneth, told the jury that he was the one who instructed his sons to take shifts and use, quote, "overwhelming force" on his son to subdue the demon inside of him.
And none of the sons questioned him. It's disgusting.
With the apparent religious activity and chanting to revive the brother, there were accusations of cult activity and possible involvement with secret societies, but the family denied all of this. The family was in court for 4 days, pleading their case. In the end, the jury found all 7 of the family members not guilty of the murder. Shocking. Absolutely shocking.
We have to remember that the only information we have in this case is from the family. We never heard Kennedy's side of the story. He may never have made any outbursts or acted badly. This very well could have been an outright murder.
Maybe they were in a cult after all, and the jury, made up of fellow members, helped keep their secrets hidden. We'll never know. Their teacher was a witch. The term Florida man is a very well-known phrase nowadays, often used when a shocking story surfaces of a man in the Sunshine State doing something beyond our belief. Well, this story goes to show that Florida woman is also a very prevalent member of the southern state. With Florida man, we often learn of an individual doing something ridiculous and sometimes humorous. A story that warrants rolling eyes and a little laugh. Well, this Florida woman is not very funny. She took things to a sinister level. Danielle Harkins was a 35-year-old high school literacy teacher in St. Petersburg, Florida. In 2012, she began studying religion and formed an interest in demonic rituals. she convinced some of her students to take part in a cult-like experiment after school. 6 boys and 1 girl. She told all of the children that they had demons inside of them and they needed to be released. Danielle was going to perform rituals on them to free them of the devil.
The students all loved Danielle. To some of them, she was the hot teacher. She was young and cool, so it's not surprising that she was able to convince them to take part in such a strange event. She charmed them and clearly convinced them that she knew what she was talking about. They trusted her.
According to the school board, she was a very good teacher, a literacy specialist, very intelligent, and very skilled. Danielle recruited the 7 teenagers to join her in a park after school. Using crude tools like a key, a broken bottle, a lighter, and a bottle of perfume, Danielle began the ritual to cleanse the children. At the park, the teens all sat down and Danielle began. She cut one boy on the hand. As he bled, she told the group that this is how you release the demons. The demon would exit the body through the wound. Then, to prevent the demon from re-entering his body, she would need to burn the wound to seal it. She took her lighter and attempted to burn the gash, but the wind kept blowing out the flame. To remedy this unforeseen problem, the teacher took out a bottle of perfume from her purse and sprayed it on the open cut. Perfume, you might be aware, is very flammable. She then took the lighter to his hand and it quickly went up in flames. He suffered second-degree burns.
While this was happening, one of the boys in the group texted a friend and told them what was going on. That friend then told their parents, and it was those parents who called the police.
Danielle continued with the ritual after lighting the first boy's hand on fire. She took a broken glass bottle and cut the back of a second boy's neck. This time, instead of dousing him in perfume, she held the flame under a key until it turned red hot, then pushed the hot metal against the gash in his neck. After the 2 boys were cleansed of their demons, the group then danced around an open flame and chanted, a ceremony to finalize the newly saved children. This was when the police arrived and arrested the teacher. When the police questioned the teacher's neighbor, Lisa Cope, she told them that she had recently become interested in extreme religious beliefs. She told the neighbor that she was okay. She did not have any demons.
The teenagers stayed loyal to the teacher throughout the entire trial. Some declined to even talk about it. They wouldn't say a word. This just demonstrates the power she had and the connection she had developed with them.
Danielle was arrested for child abuse of the 7 teens. She only served 6 months in prison. After that, she disappeared, and no one has seen her since. The Grandmother Gathering. There was a guest on the podcast Monsters Among Men named Jeff. This man Jeff tells the story of the day he was driving through Dayton, Ohio with his son named Miles. Miles was only 3, so he was in the back seat, safely strapped into a car seat. As they were driving, the 3-year-old boy was singing a song. Jeff was silently driving along and listening to his son. He wasn't paying much attention until the singing suddenly stopped.
Jeff looked up into his rearview mirror and saw his son looking out the window at something. And it was at that moment when they were passing a small cemetery. Jeff actually said it didn't seem much like a cemetery. It was more like a big garden.
There were some graves, but not many. Jeff didn't think much of it. There was no one in the cemetery at the moment, and nothing special happened inside. Then his son said to his dad, "Look at all those people." Jeff looked again, but didn't see anyone. He wasn't sure what his son meant. He looked at his son and saw that he was intently staring at the same spot as Jeff. His son then pointed at the small empty cemetery. He wasn't sure who his son meant, so he asked him who he was looking at. His son responded, "All those people over there." His son continued to stare and said, "There sure are a lot of grandmas."
Jeff was looking all around to find who his son was seeing. He asked him what the people were doing, and the 3-year-old responded by saying, "They're all standing there, looking at the grass."
Jeff still saw no one. Thinking about how sometimes children see things that adults can't, Jeff had unnerving thoughts and chills ran down his body. Jeff continued to drive past the cemetery and made their way home. Later that day, when at home, he was watching TV with his son. Jeff asked his son about the people he saw earlier, and his son said, "They weren't alive." Jeff asked if he meant the cartoon that was playing, and his son said the people at the cemetery were paused.
This is one of many cases you hear about where children can see things that adults can't. This often happens between ages of 1 and 5. Something else that happens to children at that age is talking about past lives, where the children will say words they don't know, that they've never spoken before, and completely act out of character, and then suddenly just snap back into their childish babble, acting like themselves again.
Jeff's son Miles may have seen some spirits that haven't passed on, or as he put it, were paused. Jeff ended the interview by saying he didn't know if his son had a sixth sense or a wild imagination. A terrifying stroll. Our final case is from another call with Monsters Among Men. It was the late 90s, and Joe moved from California to Georgia. Shortly after, his brother moved as well. His brother moved not too far away. Joe's brother rented a house and lived with his young daughter. The house was very unassuming, but the inside was not good, according to Joe. It did not feel good, he said.
Joe was helping his brother move into his new house. As soon as he walked in the door, his hair stood up on his skin. He said to his brother, and I quote, "This place isn't good at all."
But apparently Joe was the only one who had a bad feeling about the building. His brother didn't think much of it and continued to move things inside. Shortly after, Joe was carrying a box inside and he heard whispering. He said it was an intense whisper, sort of like an argument. He said it was coming from above him near the ceiling in the room. It scared him so bad that he ran out of the room. His brother then said he was starting to get a bad feeling as well, but he had to ignore it. What was he supposed to do? Stop moving in because of some weird energy? After Joe helped his brother move the items into the house, he said he probably wasn't going to be coming back. After this, his brother did continue to get bad feelings and experience some unsettling things throughout the time he lived in the house. The scariest situation was when Joe's 4-year-old niece couldn't be found in the house. His brother called him and said she was missing. She was later discovered wandering down a busy street. When the people saw her, they said she was walking down the road with one hand held up over her head.
In the investigation with the police and child services, they were trying to determine what had happened. It was shown that the door to leave the house was far too big and heavy for the 4-year-old to open on her own, and her father would have never let her out of the house.
The police asked the girl how she got outside, and she told them that the old lady that lives in the house opened the door. She wanted to go for a walk, so we went for a walk. The girl then said after opening the door, they pet the dog and went for a walk.
This, in a way, explains why the girl was seen with her hand over her head as she was walking down the busy street. She was holding the hand of the old woman.
The brother said that when she spoke, she was so genuine and honest, just stating the truth like a 4-year-old. Not too long after this event, Joe moved out of the house. There you have it. 5 horrifying true tales. Thank you for watching, everyone. I'm your anonymous host. See you next time.